Right, welcome back to the third edition of our coaching call with me, Ben, and with Fletch. So we'll kick off with our normal summary of the week, which I'll let Fletch start with, or maybe the summary of his day would be a better intro.
Yeah, we've got the kids at home unexpectedly because the school had an inset day today that we did forget about, but obviously they need more training, so they get a day off / working, whereas we had to pick up the pieces.
Classic parenting error there, the forgotten inset day. Did you turn up at school and try and drop them off, or did you know before you did the school run?
No, we woke up. We last night we pre-prepared ourselves, being like, all those calls I've booked in might not happen now.
So not too bad. Very good. Well, I'm just back. Lee got into the house about 20 minutes ago, back from Portugal. So I had a few days out there. Came back to the tail end of Storm Benjamin, which was all fine. Very good. So shall we start things off by going through the training plan, and then we'll dive into our second listener question. We have clearly we've gone viral because we've got two listeners now, so we've had two questions. So and actually it's relevant to this week. So this week's been a kind of deload week or unloading week. So we've pulled it back a bit, but let's dive into the...
Sounds good. Yeah, a friend of mine says that some viruses spread slower than others.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
we'll go with that. Doesn't mean they're less impactful though.
Exactly.
All right, let me bring up this. So this is kind of what you did just recently, the deload week. And I know we've got a couple of things going on question-wise around deloading, but the deload happened whilst you're in Portugal. Kind of timing worked out really nicely anyway to rest and recover both mentally and physically. So we kind of scheduled that there with a little bit of more disruption to your normal routine. It kind of makes sense to do a little bit less. Gives you more time to spend with your family and all that as well, rather than, or you probably would have liked me in some cases to have programmed you a massive week of training whilst you're out there. But next week, we haven't got anything in the diary just yet, so we kind of create that on the fly. We've just come off the back of a reasonable week so we were scheduling around sort of 85 kilometers and 7 odd hours worth of training, building up from 83, 74, 70s. We've been building for a number of weeks, and that was kind of also the justification to deload too, is when you've been building and building and building, it's a bit of a waiting game as to when things are going to stop responding and maybe even going into a bit of negative regression. It's nice to preemptively recover ourselves in order to create a bounce back. It's not always needed, but I thought it would be a good time to. So this week coming up, I think we basically not copy, we will use week 30 as our template. So we'll duplicate week 30 into week 32. Give us a nice structure to work with, because you said it's like a normal week for yourself now, so you can kind of get back to what you were doing previously. And then the easy on the Monday, I like just keeping that as a little bit of a steady eddy. We don't need to push that much. There's not much we want to hang off it because we're already going to be coming off a relatively long weekend as well. So big part, we also maybe hear children and babies screaming and shouting in the background every now and again whilst we're doing this. But threshold wise, I'm going to make this a little bit more.
I think we're on week 32 there, 31 there.
Oh yeah, that's right. No, deload. Bang, there we go. Week 32. So we have the 3x3K that you loved. I heard it in your voice. And then the 4x6 as well in that day. I don't think we need to change that too much because it was a reasonably big week anyway. After a deload, we don't want to go back to like an easy week. Probably if we're going to like red, amber and green, if we're going to sort of structure the weeks in that way, and blue being a deload, I think we go to an amber week where it's not crazy high volumes. What was this one? Tabulated is 85. So we'll probably pull back on some of the long runs. We'll make the long run like maybe like 20 and 20 again, but with slightly different structures. So there's a little bit less than the peak that we've done, but not quite the trough. So I think we'll program it in there. I think the 3x3, we can change that slightly to a 3x2 again. Easy. 3x2. Mathematically, 2, 4, 6, 8, 3, 6, 9. Actually, we can afford a 2x4 there, 4x2. Boom. My programming can work quite mathematically sometimes. We're looking at percentage of increases and so on. We need to be aware of 3x3 is 9 kilometers, 4x2 is 8 kilometers. So then we're doing a little bit less than our peak. Interval wise, we can bring that down to 3. That's a nice round session. And then we'll then tinker with the long runs. I think we'll bring that down to 20. So we'll bring that to 15 and 5. That 5 pickup at the end. Update. And then move that tab over. So we've got that in time basis. 2 options with the time kind of session. We can either go slower and start to have a little bit less of physiological stress from it, and maintain the distance or maintain the time. You won't go as far, or we can reduce the time and keep the same speed. So I think we've been building on the speed side of things, so we'll keep that to time coming down. And then boom. So now what we should have is, as if by magic, next week's plan up and ready to go. So a bit less of a long, slightly shorter on the intervals, but same structure applies.
Yeah. Good stuff. Very good. Well, I think the kind of setup of that, I suppose, leads us very nicely, like a sort of professional outfit, into our questions. And I think this is actually just coming off the back of Portugal. I've got a bit of well, whether it's interesting or not, I've got an insight into this kind of deloading week. So anyway, the question was from Rich, which was. Let me kind of paraphrase the first bit. He's always had a rule of thumb of, say, 30% pullback every 4 to 5 weeks. That's not to say I've applied it particularly well, but it may be more than that. Is more event specific type training. So I guess my question does Fletch? It doesn't ask me my opinion. God. Does Fletch have anything to say on that rule of thumb approach? So you kind of alluded to it slightly in the as we're setting up my plan for the week, but basically, what's the rule of thumb for this kind of cyclical loading? Is there one, and how best to approach it? And then I'll add my, even though you haven't asked Rich, I'll add my thoughts.
I will be heard. So I think the rule of thumb should be at some point deload. I think that's the rule of thumb, really, because when it comes into how often and by how much, then you're starting to sort of open up a bit of a can of worms. But a lot of the research was kind of looking into a 2x1, so like 2 weeks of building, a 1 week deload, and 3x1 and 4x1 and all these kind of things. And ultimately it didn't seem to matter too much because it's highly individual. If I don't know the athlete particularly well, if I don't know, if we're writing a template at the minute. We've got a training camp that has just started. So we've got 8 athletes who are doing the same training plan. We haven't physically met them yet, but we've set them the training, and now we're going to start to coach them individually. So we've set the routine for them, and we've then hypothetically put in place a 3x1. So we build for 3 weeks and we deload for 1 week. Until we know more information about that athlete, I don't want to tamper with that too much. At least I know there's a deload in there, and they know it's there too. Some athletes can get away with just constantly building until a point where we're like, oh, now I'm seeing some fatigue. Then we pull them back. And the fatigue metrics, it could be HRV, it could be perception, it could be the other half calling me up saying he's a lot more irritable than normal, all these kind of things. And then we go, okay, well, obviously there's some fatigue setting in, and so we want to pull them back this week.
Yeah.
I do believe, though, that if you are hitting the button correctly, so you are pushing things in the right way and with enough stress, 3x1 is probably quite nice. Because 3 weeks of constantly increasing the load, it's going to accumulate. And then 1 week pulling back. If you can continually build in that manner, either you've got like a professional athlete on off season would be a good example of that. They're extremely capable, but they've just had a nice amount of time off, and now they can go from almost like rock bottom and carry back up to a relative level, or they're just starting out. So it's a real individualized approach.
No, I mean, that makes sense. I'm thinking back to when I went, just been out in Portugal, and the Wednesday session was, I was like, oh great, I've got 2 by 3K and I think 2 by 6 minutes in the evening, and I went out and I was like, oh my god, like this felt like, and I guess the unwritten part. I suppose I two things from that. One was, I guess I was probably more ready for that. Slightly less effort than I thought I was. I.e., I was more tired than I thought I would be. And then the other bit of me was thinking, well, maybe there's a sort of psychological element to this, which is when I'm on a big week, you kind of there's a kind of psychological or sort of mental preparedness for that big week. So I'm like, I can see on whatever previous week, I was like, okay, I've got a big run on Saturday and Sunday, and so I'm kind of mentally getting myself ready, knowing that I had a lighter week the following week. So sort of when it comes to it, on Wednesday, I'm like, oh my word, this is half what I did last week, but I'm kind of a little bit off the pace, and I'm a bit kind of tired and thinking, God, it's different as well because it's not comparable. It's not direct to comparable because where I was in near Faro, like there's not a flat road in sight. And here where I do my intervals, I've got a nice pancake flat road. So it's hard to kind of do. But I did wonder whether there's a bit of a psychological impact to that kind of feeling of readiness or feeling of kind of capacity. A little bit, I think it's similar but different, but that idea that, for me, certainly getting halfway in a run doesn't really matter what the distance is, which then makes no logical sense. If I'm halfway through a 20K, I will feel better at the halfway point. But obviously, if I go out and run 10K, it's the same distance, but I'm feeling disproportionately, relevant. So I wondered whether there's a bit of a psychological impact to that kind of deload, the mental preparedness of like, I need to be pushing harder this week versus pulling back a bit.
Yeah, the brain is a fascinating electrical sponge. It really is, because it probably has everything to do with psychology, because it's the only thing that can make muscles contract. So, or relax actually. So the biggest part of it really is how you go into a session is almost how the session will go. And if you go in going like, oh, this will, like, I'm supposed to be recovering right now, and I did a big week last week. Whew, that was tough. This is going to be more than likely. You're going to feel like it's going to be a little bit harder because you're doing a bit less, and like, oh, I'm supposed to be recovering, so this is going to be not helping me recover in some fashion. But if you got on the start line for a 100-mile race, being like, I am shattered and I don't think I can do this, you won't.
Yeah.
And the halfway, when you do get to the halfway mark, you're like, oh, I've done 50 miles. Okay, I've only got 50 to go. Some people will break, and some people will be like yourself, will be spurred on. And that comes down to individual psychological. Yeah, exactly. Some people have their own psychological things going on too. Like one of our old coaches, he used to dig me all the time, being like, Fletch told me once that we used to do indoor running classes with headphones and treadmills, and we did like a 3-minute rep, and I said, right, you're halfway through this rep, and he just crumbled because he was like, I've got to do that all over again. And other people will be like, I'm going, like I'm running to the finish line now, not away from the start line. So I think it's everything to do with psychology. And even during a deload, with regards to the off switch in regards to training, like pulling back by 30%, some people might need more, like 50 to 60% on a deload. That's also where some niggles can crop up too, because the inflammation is starting to increase because you're now starting to repair. The fatigue is setting back. The brain's into almost like a relaxed mode. Be like, oh, I can take my time now. I'm safe. As soon as you're safe, the brain has time then to scan and go through and go, oh, that hamstring's a bit funny. I'm getting some signals coming through. I'm going to make it hurt a little bit.
I think it's very real, that the kind of that feedback loop of, I feel sort of, you're going along week by week or day by day, like churning out the kind of runs and the mileage and the stuff. And then you create a bit of space and you're kind of, oh, hang on, and things creep in, whether it's sort of mentally or physically, that space is created. And then you're like, oh, I can feel my whatever, hamstring. You're like, well, I didn't feel it while I was in the middle of like flat out intervals, but I feel it on the day off, and
Yeah,
or the
yeah.
week off rather.
So actually, this is timely because we are sat in a lecture yesterday with a couple of people that were kind of talking about this neuroplasticity piece. So it's how the brain adapts and maladapts to training and life experiences and so on. And so they gave a great analogy, which is also available on TEDx. A guy called Lorimer Moseley helped write a book called Explain Pain. Fascinating book. I really highly recommend people try and find a transcript of it or something. And it talks about the idea of threat being a key indicator as to whether you feel pain or not. So back in whenever we were, some people still are, but being chased by lions, if you trod on a piece of glass whilst you were being chased by a lion, your brain would have a choice. It's either collapse in pain and get eaten, or carry on running away from the lion and deal with the foot later. Brain chooses option B. It's like, that can wait because that's a bigger threat. Now, if we then put that into a training sort of modality of, there's a lot of work to do this week, there's a lot of training happening, there's a big thing I'm aiming for in the future, that hamstring is aching right now is not going to help me. So you almost delay that response, that the brain almost shuts down that feedback and goes, I'll deal with you later. This is more important. I'm running away from something right now. And when that training stimulus drops, suddenly then your brain can go, okay, what were you talking about earlier on?
Yeah, it's something I certainly on long runs or kind of long races. It's something you have a huge amount of time to think, and you've got to be very, very careful where you let your mind go, because you can unravel. You can, in a long run or a long race, you will have highs and lows, and one of the things is never to try and make a decision during those points. When you're feeling really good, don't make a decision, but when you're feeling really bad, don't make a decision, because you're not kind of in that middle ground, and you don't, you flip between the two. But the the kind of, I can feel my foot, or I can feel my knee, or feel I kind of have this process of like noting it. So like I'll say, I don't actually have a notebook, but you kind of note it down and you kind of park it, and then you come back to it later, and it's all the kind of internal dialogue. Because if you focus on it, much like, I'm sure if that hypothetical person being chased by a lion was then to intensely think about the glass in their foot, they'd override that subconscious fight or flight type threat reaction. And eventually they'd stop and look at their foot. And then, the lion would get them, as it were. But so I think there's a really important mental game, which is around this kind of what you focus on and what you do. And I think that plays into this whole point of the kind of deload week of like, I guess I was in that context of last week, I was going out thinking, I'm not in a rush. I'm notionally on holiday, albeit seem to have my laptop open every day. But you're notionally there. You've got more time. You're not thinking about, I better get this out. I better get the session done. And you're creating more space for it. You go out the door. It's like, oh well, I've only got to do this. Well, it's still 3K at 4 minutes or whatever it was. So you can't just like, it's not an only thing. You still got to be kind of in it. So you're not as ready. You're not as focused. You're not as all the rest of it. And yeah, I think that there's a definitely whether, and I don't know. I guess I don't know whether the mental, the kind of psychological element is bigger than the physical. I.e., was I actually much more fatigued going into it than I thought? Don't think so, because the rest of everything else was kind of fine. But I felt disproportionately fatigued, which I think is probably that kind of mental override that's kind of has a far bigger impact on us than we think we're in control of all this stuff. We're real kind of control freaky type human beings, but actually there's a lot more going on that we don't really understand. We have to
Yeah,
be
for
much more
sure.
aware before we spot it.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for a bit of a delay factor as well. Like you said, not being particularly aware of how tired we are, especially when we're pushing all the time, maybe professionally and physically. Everything's stressful, everything's kind of revolving and spinning plates. We almost become desensitized to stress and desensitized to tiredness and fatigue because it's just all about bloody time.
Yeah.
In which case we're quite hard at knowing when we're tired and not. So then when we go into a deload week, it takes time for things to drop down slowly. And maybe like 2 or 3 days into that, we're like, oh man, now I'm feeling tired. Now I'm feeling fatigued, because the body's now gone, this is now the time to feel tired and fatigued, because there's all that other stress stuff not happening. And so actually you can feel worse. And I think that's where people step away from deload weeks as well, is because they don't like feeling that way,
Yeah.
but they need to.
Yeah. So I think, there's a lot, I guess there's a lot in that, isn't there? It's not dissimilar to that. You might, you run 100 miles or something, and you get to the finish line, and then you stop for a bit, and then 5 meters is a kind of incomprehensible distance to try
Yeah,
and
exactly.
tackle, and you just run 100 miles and you can't do 5 meters. It's kind of
Yeah.
bizarre thing. So yeah.
But that's exactly it. The
But
threat's finished.
I'm not.
The threat's gone.
I guess we've half answered. We've answered Richard's question, and we've done what we normally do and gone off on a tangent to a load of other stuff. But, I think it's fair. It's definitely fair to say that process of pulling back or deloading is much harder psychologically and then in turn physically than you feel it should just be an easy thing. But like we said, I think touched on last week, like the mindset to train hard and move forward is not the same mindset that likes the idea of slowing down and kind of, not looking back as such, but kind of reversing, or not reversing, but you know what I mean, kind of pulling back.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's where I think the mindset of the athlete mindset of being like, go forward, go hard, go fast is great. But in the race, it comes out beautifully. Like that's those people who can just get on the start line and bury themselves and go, this is go home, or go big or go home, doesn't play out very well when they manage their own plan, because it's all go home, go hard or go home, go long, go hard, go home, wherever. And I think that's where it's quite nice to have someone on the outside going, no, I think actually we need to pull back right now, because in order to push forward again, go bigger, we're going to need to sort of go from a launch pad rather than from a trampoline.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
That
Wrong analogy, but
it makes a lot of sense. So I think that, so the kind of conclusion to that is, I think Rich had said 4 to 5 weeks, but I think that, so you would say as a basic rule of thumb, until you have more information, you start off on sort of 3 weeks on, 1 week off, sort of that kind of ratio. But at both ends of the spectrum, it's a bit more extreme. So the untrained end and the very trained end are slightly different. That's when you kind of see a differential.
Yeah, exactly. And the week off is not a week off. Like the key thing you can do with that deload is increase intensity or maintain it at least. And so you're looking at the mathematical thing, rather than doing 100 kilometers that week and having the overall percentage of intensity, say at 70%, pulling it down to like 50 miles a week, but increasing it to 80%. That's a big jump in intensity, but not with barely any volume in comparison. So they're still going to get a training stimulus from that. They're still going to get fitter, but it's the overall volume that's gone down.
Yeah,
so
I remember a lot of the couple of days before Novacoli, like the stuff in my plan was like, I remember the overall duration of the run, but it might be like 3 or 4K, very, very small. But it was, there were 30-second bursts, so like absolute maximum. This idea of like tapering to nothing is not what you're looking at. There's a differential that you're trying to create.
And there's loads of really cool things you can do with tapers, and there's like a three-phase taper, two-phase tapers, single-phase tapers. Everyone's kind of used to the single phase of build up and then 2 weeks just dropping down. There's a two-phase where you build up, you drop it down, you build it for again, and you drop it down again, then you race. Three-phase tapers, which Inigio, what's his last name? He literally wrote the book on endurance training. There's a three-phase taper. You build up, you drop, you build up, you drop, build up again, boom, then you race. Kind of like a deload. So it's kind of also where maybe it's structured off that, but that actually had the biggest benefits for professional triathletes, professional Olympic level athletes, because there was more recovery time. So they had the biggest output in performance because they were recovered, not because they trained the hardest and because they trained the most, because they were more recovered. And that's where I think a lot of people get on the start line too fatigued. Maybe they're trying to cram it in late into the training plan or whatever, but the getting on the start line recovered is probably the hardest part of it all.
Yeah, too little, too late. Talking of professional athletes, you're going to get in trouble in a minute because you've got children to ferry around. The real life influence of all this stuff. So
I've had a
yeah,
few looks already.
yeah, we better wrap it up. Very good. Well, we will. We've got another question already teed up for next week, but we'll touch on something else next week. And until then, I'll finish off my deload week and then get back on it, back into the happy place of pushing forward without having to worry about anything else.
Back to stress and fatigue. Yay!
Yeah. Good
Love
stuff. Nice one, Fletch. Well, I will catch up with you soon, and we'll speak to you next week.
See you next week.